We're excited to welcome Fancy Feast, a Brooklyn-based burlesque performer, writer, and sex educator. She holds the title of Miss Coney Island 2016 and is the recipient of the Revolutionary Award at the 2017 New York Burlesque Festival. Fancy Feast was drawn to burlesque-style performance as a young child, and in high school demanded a role as a Kit Kat girl in a production of Cabaret. More on that later. She was the subject of a documentary by Leon Chase, a film we recommend because A, it's good, but it will also give you a great visual landscape for her new book, Naked, on sex, work, and other burlesques. It's coming out October 10th from Algonquin Books. Welcome, Fancy Feast.
Thank you so much for having me, Cougars.
Well, that's a good place to start. You know, we love your name. We took the name Book Cougars because we kind of thought the name Cougar was a play on words. You know, we're the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. We also kind of wanted to take the name back from some of the ways that people look at it in society. Can you tell listeners how you chose your name, Fancy Feast?
Absolutely. So the name Fancy Feast was given to me. It wasn't something that I can take credit for. One of my friends was coming up with her own stage name, and she had a list of different potential names. And she called me because she thought Fancy Feast was a great name, but she's like, this is not a name for a skinny girl, and offered it to me. And it's turned out to be kind of prescient because each of the words, like fancy and feast, are both these sort of celebrations of glamour, of abundance, of this sort of this like heightened, beautiful sumptuousness. And then when you put them together, it's like the cat food that you would buy at a bodega. So I think that tension and that sort of relationship to glamour and abjection is something that I play with a lot in my work. So it was the perfect name for me.
We also would like you to just explain what burlesque is.
Burlesque is a style of performance that nowadays is most commonly ascribed to artistic striptease that happens in bars, in theaters, sort of generally speaking outside of a strip club setting, although not always. It's very connected with circus, vaudeville, and sideshow traditions. Historically, burlesque referred pretty widely to a variety of low art forms, including skits, including sort of body songs, so that back in the day, there wasn't such a thing as a strip club. There was a burlesque house. And so you would see comedians and actors and singers, and then also striptease performance all in the same place. And nowadays, that name just refers to the striptease performance.
Well, yeah, you talk in your book, you mentioned that it's part old world, part new world. And I really like that. And you made me think about one of my favorite novels is Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. And one of her characters is named Kitty, you know, who is a vaudeville performer. And I was like, oh, Kitty, Fancy Feast, like it clicked in my brain. So thank you for that.
Totally. I think there's a rich tradition of the feminine and the feline, how they're connected.
Right. So why don't you give listeners kind of your shelf talker or elevator pitch about what this essay collection encompasses?
So my book, Naked, I try to tell people that I want to become the Anthony Bourdain of taking my tits out. So it's a book of essays that are about the sort of cultural underground that I'm in, that relate to my long history of work in burlesque, in other forms of nightlife, in other parts of the sex industry. And the sort of thesis, and this is like not what I would say in an elevator pitch, because I don't know if people in elevators want to hear this kind of shit, that it really is about how our culture talks about sex and bodies and subjectivity through the lens of somebody who is working in a place where there's a ton of projection happening in order for my like job role to be successful. So it's like I learn a lot about the people who are projecting onto me based on all of the different roles that I've held in my work life.
Yeah, the opening essay, you talk about that, the reflection, you know, that when you're on stage, maybe people in the audience's assumption is they're there to just watch you, but you're also watching them. And I just thought that was so interesting when I read it. And it reminded me a little bit, if I could just go on a little tangent here, of when I first moved to Guilford. It was in 2015. And my son came to visit, and he was in his early 20s. And he wanted to go to Pepe's Pizza, which is, New Haven pizza, which we had never had the experience for. And we went to a comedy show, and we were just there to watch it. And there were several comedians, and one of them, he wasn't the headliner, but he was kind of bombing. And he was telling very crass jokes, which didn't bother me at all. But then as he was bombing, he turned to me and my son, and he was like, "What's up with you two? Like, is this what you do as mother and son? You go to comedy shows?" And it shocked me. And part of why it shocked me, I think, was it felt inappropriate and some other things, and it was embarrassing because I'm not someone up on stage, but it also was like this weird, like the wall was broken, and you talk in your essays about insult comedians and how sometimes that happens. But it also, when I read that part of what you were writing, it's like, well, but you're in this relationship with the audience, right? Can you talk about that a little? Because you're telling stories on stage.
Absolutely. I think it sounds like that comedian was really flailing, first of all, which hopefully is not what I do on stage. I think there's a difference between reaching out to your audience with a sort of outstretched hand, metaphorically speaking, versus reaching out to strike. And that's part of why I have such a difficult time with performance that is purely combative or that is defensive. It doesn't feel generous. And when burlesque is performed, it's intended to be a conversation between the people on stage and the people in the audience. Or, oftentimes there isn't a stage. So it's about the performer moving around in the same room, being in the same environment as the audience. And I think that's really beautiful. And there's a lot of transformative potential in that kind of relationship. When the pandemic was in a different stage, like in the earlier phases of it, all of the clubs were closed. And so there was digital performance, and burlesque performers were doing their acts at home. And we got to feel what it was like for the first time to perform for an audience that we couldn't see. And we couldn't have that kind of relationship of immediate feedback and conversation, nonverbal conversation happening. And it was very different. It was extremely eerie. So burlesque cannot exist without the audience, I think, being present and being giving and taking in equal measure, I think.
Yeah. So one of the questions we have is about your storytelling. And we were curious, how long does it take you to put together, do you call them a skit or a scene?
An act?
An act, I'm sorry. Yeah, an act. How long does it take you? Like you mentioned earlier when we were talking that you might have an idea and boom, you can put it on that night. And others seemed from the documentary and the book a little bit more complex. And we're just curious, what is your process and how long does it take from that initial idea to you're performing it on stage?
It really depends for me. Some acts, as I said, yes, if I have an idea and I already have costume pieces that are going to work for it, or it's something that doesn't involve a ton of fabrication, then, give me 24 hours and I can go. At least with a sort of initial draft. I think most things really do get worked out on stage. Like you do a lot of A/B testing with different crowds, seeing what lands and what doesn't. With some acts, I've had them in the hopper like for 10 years or something like that. I've had ideas that haven't been executed yet that I'm just sitting on. And then when I'm creating acts, if I'm working with a costumer, I'm at their mercy in terms of what their timeline is. And I often don't choreograph until my costume is completed, because the costume is going to dictate how things come off and in what order and what my movement is going to feel like. Like if I'm wearing a corset, I'm not going to be able to bend over, for example. So it's all of that is going to be sort of guided by my limitations with what I'm wearing. So that may take, 6 months or something like that, longer, depending, from planning and design, fittings, whatever, execution. And then it's however long I practice and feel comfortable with my choreography and with my with the themes, and then have people watch me and give me some notes and stuff like that, like have my trusted friends before putting it on stage. So it really does depend, which I guess is an unfortunate answer. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I imagine there's different levels of complexity to the act you're trying to perform as well.
Absolutely. And some of my acts are very complex, but the complexity is done in the audio editing. Because I went to film school, I'm such a nerd for this kind of audio and video engineering stuff. So I often will create audio that is bespoke. And sometimes, like, if the complexity is there and not in the costume, then I can do things a lot faster, actually.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about your experience with cabaret. Because Emily and I were both, your book, it's one of the few books in a long time that has made me both laugh and cry. And so your sense of self, it seems like you've always had such a great sense of self. And the story about you claiming a role as a Kit Kat girl in cabaret, I would just love for you to share that with our listeners.
Oh, sure. I one of the most sort of one of my first sanctuaries, I guess, was high school theater, and my 10th grade musical was Cabaret, and I had initially been cast as Fräulein Schneider, who has a great role in the play, but who is a crone character and is not sexy. And I've always been fat, and so I was taking that very personally, because I think there's this automatic maternalizing or assuming that fat people are matronly or not sexy, and that was like too edgy for high school theater, right? So I petitioned to have a demotion in my casting, so that rather than having this juicy role with a solo song, I could be a chorus girl and wear lingerie and do a chair dance. And that was granted. And the process of claiming that for myself, and of putting the choreography into my body, of feeling what it was like to have stockings and gloves and doing a chair dance and wearing high heels, it was this first taste of something really addictive and really dangerous for me. And I was like, well, I would like the rest of my life to be about this. But I assumed that because Cabaret is a play that is about the Weimar era, that was something that was gone from our world, that was like, I would have to, I guess, like, just hope that I would keep getting cast as a Kit Kat girl for the rest of my life. But then when I saw burlesque in New York for the first time, it was this amazing light bulb moment of like, oh, this exists. This is what it is now.